Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Media reports over the last few days have been reporting that the government is planning to raise non-tariff barriers on a number of products by putting in place product-specific monitoring systems or by allowing them only through licensing by adding them to the restricted list. Financial dailies have been reporting that various ministries, including Commerce, Finance, along with the line ministries, are discussing the plan, and a series of meetings are taking place in view of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's call for Atmanirbhar Bharat, which would mean reduce import dependency and boost local manufacturing. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze what is import monitoring system or mechanism. Joining me on the program today are Subhash Chandra Pandey, former advisor, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India; D K Aggarwal, President, PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry; and Jayant Das Gupta, former Ambassador of India at the WTO. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Pandey, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first understand and analyze the basic concept of import monitoring mechanism or system.
You see, under Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992, the Director General Foreign Trade in the Ministry of Commerce, Department of Commerce, is the nodal authority to notify the regime for regulating imports and exports. From time to time, they come out with exempt policies. The last policy was for 2015 to 20, which from 1st April has been extended by 1 year. So under this policy, all the goods are classified into 8-digit Indian trade classification harmonized system codes, of which the first 6 digits are international classification and the last 2 are India specific further classification. So for each of these 8-digit codes, the imports are free unless put in the specifically in 3 categories: restricted, requiring imports, or canalized, means import only through designated agencies, or prohibited altogether, banned. So these lists are from time to time updated, and generally these, as part of the policy, the list is frozen. Time to time, as a dynamic response to situations, the changes are made. Very recently, for example, last week, cut flowers, it is in free import list, but it has been stipulated that the import will be only through Chennai airport. So that condition has been added. Similarly, tires, they were in the free list, import list. It has been put in the restricted list. That means an import license will be required. So this is broadly the list, and each importer exporter has to first obtain a registration with DGFT IEC code, and on import he has to give full documentation giving details of what is being imported, what is the country of origin, what classification, what value, complete details. So in sum, this is the system for import monitoring.
Okay, all right. Since we are here then, Ambassador, can the mechanism be different for different products or different sectors? Say, for instance, for steel, they can have certain set of restrictions, and for something else, say for copper, they can have something else. Is that how it works, or is it a one-fit-all kind of a mechanism?
The import monitoring mechanism can be different for different products, depending on which aspects of the product are important for us. And for instance, if there are certain chemicals which are coming into the country, which could have dual use, and we could try to find out if we restrict it only for a particular use. So we can always say that what is the use to which you are going to put it to. So that is the kind of fine tuning which we can do to the import monitoring mechanism. As far as the steel imports are concerned, for which we already have a monitoring mechanism since 2019, it is basically about compliance with the Bureau of Indian Standards, which was put in slightly earlier, and that is what is sought to be ensured through the import monitoring mechanism. And as Dr. Pandey mentioned, the unique registration number is given, and only that needs to be quoted by the importer at the time of clearance of his documents by customs.
Okay, so there are several aspects that need to be understood and that need to be taken forward. I'll come back to both of you in just a bit. But before that, Mr. Aggarwal, how will non-tariff barriers really help the industry, and is this something that you're looking forward to?
If you look at, there are two kind of ways by which we can restrict import. One is by putting tariff barriers, which our government in last 5 years, since 2014, we have increased the tariff for almost 3,500 items out of 11,000 imported items. But the other way is that we have these non-tariff barriers. That is by way of, one is that online monitoring of imports, where every importer, before importing, he has to register on the portal. Like we have steel import monitoring system, SIMS, which is called. So the importer has to register on the SIM portal. And once he registers, he mentions how much quantity is importing, from whom he is importing, what is the value of the import, and what is the country of origin. So having these online monitoring parameters, and then the other thing is that we have some quality standards being rolled out, some technical specifications which are being formulated. So when these imports they happen, then there is we have to see that whether they are adhering to those regulations or not. The other thing is that we have this out of these non-tariff barriers. One is that we have online monitoring system. Then other thing is we put them on restricted list. And when we say restricted list, that means before importing, they have to take the permission from the government. And there, when you take the permission from the government, then government can control the imports. So these perform a very important objective, one that government can take the necessary policy intervention which is required whenever it is required. Secondly, there have been a lot of instances where China and other countries, they have been diverting their imports through other countries. So to detect that the country of origin, and if some country is not a producer of a particular item, and if the imports are coming from that particular country, like recently it has happened from Hong Kong. A lot of import has come from Hong Kong, which was earlier we had a surplus, trade surplus. Now there is a trade deficit of almost $10 billion. Suddenly the deficit has increased. So there is a cause of concern, and one has to look at how this import has increased, whether there's a diversion from Chinese manufacturers or something else is happening. So these policy interventions, these controls are possible when you have this kind of online monitoring system in place, or restricted category or restricted category. So I think they perform a very important purpose. And as our Prime Minister has given a clarion call, and we have to become more self-reliant. So I think this is a very important thing to do. Of course, industry is with the government, and we as a chamber support this government move. We would want that, there is always in this diversity, the country has always come out victorious. It might be a short-term loss to some of the industries, but overall this is going to be a long-term gain, and we support the move of the government.
Okay. All right. Since we are here then, Mr. Pandey, how is this going to help Indian companies, and more specifically the Make in India initiative and Indian manufacturers on the whole?
You see, as we just discussed, the product-specific import controls are based on quality, public safety, and other general laws and regulations. The idea is not to discriminate between imported product and domestic product. If a certain product is considered to meet certain quality specifications, certain standards and specifications, those standards apply equally to domestically manufactured goods as well as imported. You can only exempt imported goods from domestic quality requirement if they are meant for re-export, if they are going for export to being consumed by a different countries. So one thing one has to be very clear that this is not a discrimination per se. It is about checking the ingress of poor quality imports being done. That is why we also check the second-hand waste material, etc., which are come very cheap, and they are destroying the domestic industry, and they are harmful. So it is the hazardous nature, public safety angle which is important, not really targeting any particular country or any particular product. The basic philosophy is that many times we have not been as sophisticated in regulating non-tariff barriers, and we have allowed a free regime, much too free, to the discomfiture of the Indian industry, leading to ingress of even substandard goods being dumped in the Indian market.
Okay, so it's going to be a level playing field. It's going to be the same rules for everyone, is what Ms. Pandey is suggesting. You know, Ambassador Dasgupta, I just want taking a cue from there. It's a basic follow-up question, really, on will the mechanism in any way impact our relations with other countries, our bilateral relations, because we've seen that happen with other countries in the past.
Trade forms a very important part of the bilateral relations with other countries. And if it is going to get affected seriously because of the import mechanism that we put in place, or the licensing procedures that we put in place, then there could be a fallout of that. Having said that, if we put the same standards in the domestic sector for, let's say, food products, let's say steel products, as we have done, and then we can also, that is open to us under the WTO regime, we can have it notified that for imports as well, we will require the same standards to be met. And for that, if we notify it under the Bureau of Indian Standards law, then the exporter will have to register first with the BIS, get its quality tested, get a certificate, and then only it can export to India. So these are some of the non-tariff barriers or technical barriers to trade that can be put in. In a similar manner, for agricultural products and fisheries products, we can have the sanitary and phytosanitary standards also come in and say that these are our standards for import, and we also are enforcing the same standards for domestic products. So below this, we will not allow you to sell, and obviously not allow things to be imported. So this we can do legitimately, and no country can have any quarrel with it. But if we do it in a discriminatory manner, if there is, for instance, there are just two suppliers or exporters to India, one of them enjoys a 90% market share of exports to India and the other one 10%. Then if we put it in, obviously the one which has a very large market share of exports to India will get affected. So hypothetically, if such a restriction gets placed, then there would be a cause for concern by the exporting country. But the final thing which I wanted to underline is that whatever we do, it has to be done on the basis of either scientific evidence that it is going to affect human health, plant health, animal health, or that it is going to affect public safety, or it is going to be against public morals. So there are a few exceptions which are provided under Article 20 of the GATT, which was negotiated in 1947. So these are the restrictions which we can legitimately enforce, and nobody can quarrel with these restrictions. But if we do things in a manner which is not WTO compliant, then there could be problems.
Okay. So import monitoring mechanism or having some kind of import restrictions is one aspect, but at the end of the day, the industry too needs to step up, Mr. Aggarwal, and deliver really as far as if you want to become a major manufacturing hub. Is the industry ready to face the challenge?
See, to put industry on the competitive roadmap, a lot has to be done even by the government, and there are many things which we say cost of doing business. If we look at the cost of doing business or cost of logistics, we are almost 10 to 12%, and the world standard is around 5 to 6%. So we are, in terms of cost of logistics, we are much higher. Similarly, if we talk of cost of productivity, cost of labor could be cheap in India, but if you look at cost in terms of productivity, we are much, much higher. So we have to change our laws. The labor laws have to be very flexible, and the people need to be skilled. So overall cost of productivity has to come down. Similarly, the cost of compliance. If you look at so many compliances in the life cycle of a company, I was told in pharma industry, almost 5,000 compliances they have to do. And for an average enterprise, it is more than 2,000 compliances they have to do. So there is a huge cost of compliances that has to come down. Cost of land and availability of land. That is again something which government has to work. And then one window service. Of course, many states have introduced one window service, but there is no timeline that if permissions are not received, say within 15 days, within 30 days, then it should be a deemed permission. So something like this has to be done. Cost of power, cost of electricity, I think this is again one item which one has to look at. We have to be competitive, so we need to reduce our cost of doing business. I think that is very, very important. So, of course, our government is doing a lot, and we are very confident that the way government is bent upon doing a lot of reforms in terms of labor reforms, in terms of enforceability of contract. I think that is again a very important thing. The enforceability of contract, how much time it takes for a commercial dispute to get resolved. I think these are the concern areas which government is very well aware of, and they are taking a lot of decisions, and we are very sure that in next maybe 1 year, 2 year, the roadmap is there. So we should have all these things in place, and we would be very competitive.
Okay, I'll come back to you on a follow-up question on what kind of policy level changes that are required and what is it that industry is looking for ahead in the program. But taking the discussion forward for the time being, Mr. Pandey, there are several reports that have been doing the rounds now in the media about how there are at least 350 products that are going to come under this import mechanism system. Are there any prime candidates at the moment, any sectors that we need to watch out for specifically, or any products that we need to watch out for specifically that may come under the mechanism?
So, you see, the import dependence is about 25%, especially if we are talking in the context of China. And it is across a large number of sectors, pharma, automobile parts, and so in some of these sectors, the dependence is so deep and at such an intermediate level that immediate phasing out of dependence is not feasible. It will take time to develop import substitution. So the first target is primarily on the low-tech consumer goods item, for which the quality standards are a good way to control and regulate this thing. And this has already been done. We have also done it through tariff barriers, because for many of the items, our actual applied tariffs have been much less than the WTO bound rates. So utilizing that gap, we have, but even now there is for many commodities there is a gap is still there, and that gap can be utilized up to the WTO bound rate. But the low-tech consumer items are the things, and apart from that, steel items and products, which I think they will be the primary candidate. But in due course of time, as the import substitution progresses, as the domestic capability develops, we can see it penetrating in more sectors.
Right. So, Ambassador, what has our experience been really as far as import restrictions are concerned? Can we expect the foreign companies to comply or probably cry foul going forward? Is that something that we need to watch out for and keep in mind?
If we impose restrictions on scientific evidence, then nobody can have a problem or raise a problem with that. So I don't think foreign companies will raise a hue and cry about it. But as far as finished products are concerned, products like toys, for instance, or consumer goods, especially the low-tech ones, they're it would be a slightly difficult area to put in restrictions which would be based on quality standards, because there aren't very well-defined quality standards for finished products, and those that are there can easily be met by foreign companies. So there would be a problem about imposing unilateral measures which are not based on, as I mentioned, the general exceptions of the WTO, and then sustaining that if it comes to a dispute. The experience of having import substitution going forward has been a mixed one. As Mr. Aggarwal mentioned, we need to do a lot of things domestically to enable an industry to be set up and to then compete on a global basis. Because ultimately, it is not the domestic manufacturing sector and the market alone that will determine whether an industry survives or not. It will survive only if it is globally competitive. And for that, all the points that Mr. Aggarwal mentioned will have to be taken into account, and the government will have to pick and choose, because it can't do everything for all the sectors at the same time. And one of the factors which I wanted to mention, which has perhaps been not mentioned hitherto, is that the cost of finance is very high in India, because the rate at which finance is available to set up an industry for working capital requirements, all these are much higher than the competing countries. And especially if you take China, the hidden subsidies that China offers through bank finance, through almost negligible prices for land, because land you can't really buy in China, it is given on 30-year lease normally, and the government takes it back once you shut down the industry. So that the electricity rates, these are the 3-4 things which are of major concern, and unless we help, and we have taken initiatives in 2 of these areas, electronics and pharma, through the production-linked incentive scheme. That I feel is the way to go. That is something which, if we can replicate it in other areas which are of vital interest, where our import bill is also high, then we can perhaps move ahead and make import substitution or global competitiveness of Indian products a reality.
Absolutely. All right. So, Mr. Aggarwal, what policy level changes or what kind of hand-holding does the industry need to see, or certain sections of industry need to see from the government if we have to take this push to the next level?
I would say that land availability is one of the biggest issue. If somebody, say some foreign investor, they want to come to India, then if they approach any state, it takes almost a year to get the land with the required infrastructure. So if our state governments, if they can come forward with their land bank where all infrastructure is ready, I think that can be a big, I'll say, ease of doing business than people who want to invest into India, and we are looking for a lot of FDI. So that is, I think, the first thing. And the cost of acquiring the land, that is second, that even the cost has to be lower. And then there has to be no issue with the title. A lot of land reforms are to be done. The records are to be digitized. So all those things need to be in place. And secondly, as what China did, they created clusters. Like in India, we have more than 730 districts. So if you can look at the advantage of these districts, what is the core competence, what is the core strength, and if you can develop, say, for 1 or 2 products, we focus in each district, and we create clusters, industry clusters in those districts, and we create, common facilities in those clusters. Then every unit, because we have a lot of MSME, and we are a country with most of the MSMEs taking the country forward. So if you can have cluster-based, system where a lot of common facilities are being set up for those clusters, and they can take advantage of these common facilities, then their cost of production will also come down, and their specialization would be there. So I think these are some of the things which, if done, and as Ambassador also pointed out, that the cost of capital, I forgot, and that is some of very important point. Still, there is a lot of scope in bringing down the cost of capital. Even today, if for an MSME, the cost of capital is very high. So that has to really come down to a very, at least 3 to 4% gap is still there. So unless until it comes to a level of actual availability to the MSME sector, if it is at the rate of 6 to 7%, only then we can think of making them a viable and competitive
Right.
from the world perspective.
Okay. Time now to get quick closing remarks from all my panelists. I've got about 2 minutes left on the program. So very quickly and briefly, the best way forward, starting first with you, Mr. Pandey.
The best way forward, I fully agree with Mr. Aggarwal, is to further improve ease of doing and reduce cost of doing business. It is indeed very high and lot of work remains to be done. So I think without that in the medium term, none of these measures are going to be sustainable. So we need it latest by yesterday.
Okay. All right. Ambassador.
While the import monitoring mechanism can provide us with a lot of details about the precise kind of product that is being imported, so that we can start taking initiatives to manufacture those in India. For that, toward that end, it could be very useful. But it should not disrupt the supply chain of the domestic manufacturing industry, because it has also got interlinkages with exports. So that is something which we need to be very careful about whenever we put in an import monitoring mechanism. Second point is that we should not unnecessarily waste the time and put an interest burden on our importers by making it cumbersome and time consuming. So we need to be very transparent, we need to be quick, and there has to be an automaticity about licensing if we put in place a licensing mechanism for the imports of certain products.
Okay. And Mr. Aggarwal, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
COVID-19 has given us an, I'll say, unprecedented opportunity where a lot of companies are thinking of moving out of China, moving their production facilities out of China. So India should seize this opportunity, and I will say India has the capacity, the bandwidth, and the wherewithal. So I'm sure that this is a golden opportunity for us to become a world power.
Okay. All right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that if a level playing field is provided and decisions are taken in a scientific way, then no one should have problems with it. And we have to have globally competitive industries and products. We need to have the right cost of finance and the right kind of capital is also what the panelists are suggesting. Another issue that needs to be addressed is that of cheap electricity. At the moment, of course, continuous and cheap electricity is a problem. That too needs to be addressed. And with the right kind of impetus and the right kind of incentives, we can scale new heights and we can ensure that we reach new levels is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.